And welcome to another Round the Rotary podcast. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We appreciate it. And before we begin, I got to say that Round the Rotary podcast is brought to you by Capital Petroleum Consultants. CPC specializes in project engineering and well site supervision in all disciplines of the oil and gas industry. Contact us through www.capitalpetroleumconsultants.com to see what CPC can do for you today. And this podcast, we're kicking off on an early Monday, not really early, but you know, it's 2021, January, second week being productive. So it's early for me. So we got Joe Sinnot on the other side of the line. Where are you tuning in from today?
I am here in cloudy Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Well, it's pretty gloomy here today in Houston too. And I guess everywhere in Texas got snow but Houston yesterday. So that's pretty cool. And Joe is the executive coach, an executive coach in the oil and gas industry, as well as the founder of Witting Partners. And Joe, thanks for coming on today. How are you, bud? My
pleasure. I'm doing good. I'd say we definitely have some figurative gloom ourselves here in Pittsburgh as we're talking here right after the Steelers got, I don't want to say embarrassed, but I wasn't embarrassed by Cleveland last night. So
he's not going to
sharing some semblance of gloom here up in the north.
Well, let's take that doom and gloom and let's have a positive conversation today. How about that?
Sounds good, JP.
So, Joe, why don't you messaged me a couple months back, not a couple months, probably about a month ago, and you mentioned your background, your experience, and we both thought it would probably good to get you on the show to kind of talk about your experiences in the oil and gas industry. And as we talked about before, this is the first time I'm talking to Joe, and I really do enjoy these conversations because Joe and I, this is our first time we've talked. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That's correct. And it's interesting because I enjoy it because it's more of a genuine conversation, I feel like. And I think your experience in the oil and gas industry and how you pivoted in 2019 could probably speak to a lot of our audience right now that are kind of looking for the new roles or potentially thinking about exiting the oil and gas industry again, which is, if that's people's personal decision, and that's fine. We support that if you got to support your family. So, Joe, why don't you get us kicked off, man? Why don't you tell us about your background and kind of your experience with oil and gas and where you're at today?
Sure. Well, as far as background, if we go all the way back, I was born and raised in New Jersey. So,
what part
East Coast there, northern New Jersey, about 10 or 15 miles outside of New York City.
Oh, what part? What's the city?
West Orange is the town. Newark, it would be the reference point for most people, but
I grew up in Connecticut, so I'm a Jersey little Springsteen fan, huh?
I think I'm contractually obligated to say yes. Bruce Springsteen is a talented artist who produced much good. No, so fellow East Coast person. Although, of course, being from New Jersey, I have the extra distinction of being from the only state right now where you don't pump your own gas, which is an anecdote I usually work in for most conversations with people who haven't met me.
What do you mean you don't pump your own gas?
It is against the law. So every gas station is full service in the Garden State.
Is that a code response?
No, this is a decades long law. I don't know when it popped up, but it's been around for certainly as long as I've been around.
All right, I dig that. Anyway, sorry, keep on going.
That's all right. And again, it's, like I said, it's usually something. It usually comes up at some point when people start questioning how the heck I wound up in the oil field being from New Jersey, and I need to stop and point out that, it doesn't make sense for lots of reasons. Nevertheless, I am here. And I guess the journey to here came after I left New Jersey, went off to school, went to Notre Dame, studied chemical engineering, chose chemical engineering, a couple of reasons. One, I think chemical engineering seemed to be the broadest, at least at the time, of the engineering disciplines. So I figured, hey, if I wanted to go to medical school, law school, get an advanced degree, that option would be there. And quite frankly, I think I assumed that I would probably wind up back in New Jersey working for some pharmaceutical company in some stereotypical chemical engineering role.
Right.
Not meant to be you could probably either blame my grades or maybe lack of quality internships or whatever it was, or merely fate. But as it turned out, a company called Schlumberger came to campus. Through my application at them, wound up getting a first interview, and one thing led to another, and wound up offshore Gulf of Mexico on drilling rigs.
Well, what enticed you about, I guess, applying to Schlumberger? I guess if you're pursuing all these other different industries, like what about Schlumberger coming to campus where you're like, I'll give it a go? Is it one of those things where it's like, I need a job regardless of what industry it is, or did something bring you on?
I'd love to say that it was this great thoughtful, intentional decision. But the reality was, it was a big career fair. There was a booth. There was probably a short line, or they were giving something away that was, interesting. And literally, or I don't want to say through my resume, I'm sure I gently handed to them and said whatever line I had rehearsed to them before I walked away.
Right.
And when we got to the first interview, though, I will say, as things became more clear about what Schlumberger actually was, it was very clear that, a role with them would mean some, probably a little bit more adventure than if I did wind up, again, working in some lab somewhere in New Jersey, or doing something, again, a little bit more stereotypical.
Right.
So I think, for one, once I had some clarity of what it was a sense of adventure. And then once I was in the interview, it was very clear that what they were looking for wasn't a 4.0 GPA, stellar resume with all of these great accolades and things to pat yourself on the back from. It was quite literally somebody who could stay up for a day and a half straight and still function, and who had the flexibility and the freedom to go and take a job where, again, you don't know what's going to happen day to day. And, that had appealed to me. I think taking advantage of the situation was a big piece, right? I didn't have anything tying me down. I didn't have a girlfriend at the time. I didn't have any reason to tie myself to New Jersey or
what was, I mean, I guess growing up in New Jersey, then going to Notre Dame, what was your first thought, I guess, once you got on that, I'm assuming it was a helicopter or whatever, a crew boat, whatever, and you got on that first rig? I mean, I grew up in Connecticut, so I'm the first generation oil and gas. So it was very new. Like, it was a different world, but it was fun for me. But what was your experience, I guess, having this background that wasn't oil and gas, no exposure to it, suddenly working offshore in the Gulf of Mexico?
It was, I think on the one hand, it was consistent with, blue collar upbringing, neither parent graduated college, that whole story. A lot of people have that same story. So, the work I had done, you work in the summers, it was maintenance, it was hard work, it was labor, so I think in that sense, it kind of felt right. Like it felt more right than probably having a white collar job sitting in an office.
Right.
But in terms of the fun and the adventure, 100%, to your point, took a crew boat out. It was the first rig. I can paint that picture. There was probably one day of all the days I, spent offshore, and that was probably the most vivid memory.
Yep.
The staring up, it was jack up rig, it was like a scene from a movie, right? At least in my eyes. It was at night, the lights are coming down, it's jack up, you're looking up, they lower the personnel basket down, you throw your bag in the middle, you step on this thing and you're being lifted up. And again, it would be very easy for somebody to say, what the hell are you doing? You got a 4-year engineering degree from Notre Dame, and you're being, hoisted 100 and something feet up in the air onto this rig. So, I don't know how clear that thought was, but it certainly, came to pass having conversations with people on the rig who again, were pretty quick and blunt to say, in no uncertain terms, what are you doing here? How did you wind up here? So yes, definitely an adventure, JP.
I remember that first day of getting on that basket as well. It was just days like, that was such an experience. It was everything about it. Anyway, so keep going on. So you're working Gulf of Mexico, Schlumberger, keep going.
Yeah. So all offshore. It was a handful of land jobs for the most part, offshore, variety of circumstances, situations, deep water, shallow. Towards the end, it was mostly deep water. Enjoyed the service aspect, sort of the craziness of it. Again, that's kind of what I signed up for, right? I didn't sign up for any sort of certainty or regularity. Not that there's any of that in the oil and gas industry. Certainly took advantage of my time, and about 3 years in, it was time to move on. And, I'll be honest, one of the things pushing me to move on from Schlumberger was the fact that I had actually met someone up here in Pittsburgh who was now my wife. So, that made the decision, easier to say, 3 years was good experience. I don't know what the statistics are these days, but I feel like 3 years is probably at or maybe even above average for a lot of the new hires they bring on, and wound up coming up here to Pittsburgh and started work for what was then Equitable Resources, and then has since become EQT Corporation, which.
So what role did you switch to at Equitable or EQT?
So when I came up, I started off as, you could say, a reserves development engineer. So it was like a quasi, budgeting, planning, a little bit of reservoir, a little bit of reserves. So it was that role, but I knew coming in that I was going to be on some sort of rotation program. So they made that very clear in the interview, which again had appeal, right? I had the drilling background. It was definitely a huge advantage coming into that environment with that background, but I also knew I'd get to see some other elements of the industry.
Okay, so you move up, move up there. You're at EQT, and then what?
So spent about a year in that first rotation, doing things that were, well, different for me, certainly a different environment, obviously coming from offshore to the office.
Did you enjoy that switch from working on a rig to the office life?
I don't know if I'd use the word enjoy. I think I appreciated, one, having had the prior experience, which again, you can't replicate. And quite frankly, once you've left it, it can be tough to go back to. So it's one of those, wow, I'm glad I did that. Not sure that that's for me moving forward. So I appreciated the shift. I think it was, it was just a different scale, right? I mean, a different level of intensity. EQT has been, and I'm sure continues to be, intense, as many oil and gas jobs are. But it was a different intensity. The last job I was on offshore, I remember distinctly, was $11.25 a second was the spread rate. That's what the company was paying. And, I remember that intensity. You got the company man on the rig floor who's, staring me down as I'm trying to, finish up the tools before they go down hole. And, that's pressure right there.
Oh,
and, it's a different type of pressure when you're in an office setting and when, things are a little bit more fluid and, it's, you can come in early, you could stay late, you can kind of do whatever. And you don't necessarily have people breathing down your neck to that degree. So yeah, enjoy. Yeah. I think long-term, certainly having that stability has been a huge blessing. But it definitely, was, needless to say, it was an adjustment.
Okay. All right. So you go up there, you're doing, so what year did you move up there?
So it's 2008.
Okay. 2008. All right. So walk me through kind of what led you kind of in your current role today.
Yeah. So 2008, just for some context, that was just as the Marcellus was, starting to get figured out. I think EQT had maybe 6 wells in the Marcellus, 6 horizontal wells in Marcellus at the time. And again, they were very much just exploratory. So, EQT's bread and butter at that point was becoming these shallower horizontal wells, on the order of $1 million a piece in Lower Huron, Eastern Kentucky, Southern West Virginia. So, they were getting into this sort of well manufacturing mode, but the Marcellus was still the next thing. So, very fortunate to start at that time. And, when I moved out of that reserves development role, I found myself back in drilling, which it was funny at the time. I was like, oh, I forgot. Oh, was that even on the rotation? I wasn't planning to go back into drilling so soon. So, a year in, went into drilling, was sort of a conventional drilling engineer, if you will, in terms of, banging out progs and, coordinating with folks in the field, serving as company man on occasion. And, probably the biggest thing in that role that I did it was about a year and a half that I was in the role totally. And then about maybe half of that was on standing up WellView, which, if is a, daily reporting tool to condense all the daily operations. And, in that role, in coordinating that project and working with IT and certainly people in the field and other engineers, really gave me a chance to, to learn much more than beyond drilling, but actually, the nuts and bolts of how the field and the office were interacting, even beyond what I was doing, in my drilling engineer role. So, that was the first taste of, one, sort of leading a cross-functional project, and two, of, starting to build, rapport with the guys in the field who you're going to be pushing this new technology out on and getting their feedback. And, we can talk in more detail about some of the stops along the way, but I think, that was the first sense of, hey, forming connections with people, building trust, working from the president of the production company at EQT all the way down to, the men and women in the field that are getting the job done, and really trying to, form those connections, which I think, again, if we fast forward to my role as a coach now, was invaluable, but also really kind of set up a foundation and a framework for the, I don't know, half dozen other roles that I held at EQT before eventually transitioning out of there.
Well, going back to, I guess, what you were talking about, building trust and communication with the people in the field and all that stuff. So I know we had Michael Risby on here before, and he mentioned that he went up to the Marcellus for, I guess, one of his first roles, Anadarko. And part of that was, I guess, when that area started blowing and going. And part of his role was, I guess, communicating to the communities. You know what I mean? It was a new market for oil and gas industry to be in. And you had to, he's mentioned that you had to kind of, I guess, not win the community support, but kind of show the community who the oil and gas industry is and kind of win the hearts and minds. Did you have any experience, I guess, with the community? What was the community feeling? I mean, what was your experience coming dealing with the community? Did you have much, I guess, proximity to that or not?
Yeah, I did. Fortunately, I did. Because, as you state, you're going out to this community, you're doing, newer things, or certainly at a different scale than they had been used to.
Right.
And, the EQT community relations department, public relations, government relations, they would have open houses. They would send, they love sending young engineers out who can speak to some of the technical things. So, I enjoy doing that. I know a lot of others enjoy doing that. And you really are going into the communities and, you're answering their questions, and they appreciated hearing it, I think, from technical folks who, again, whether it was ignorance or not, we're not going to spin things. We're saying, yeah, this is it. Here's the science behind it. Here's why we're doing it. And, to the extent you talk about the bigger picture and development and economics and why this is important, and being able to do that and go beyond talking points. Yeah, that was huge. And again, it's normal, real human conversations that build trust and allow you to do your job better. Right. And to do it, with certainly more support, than you would otherwise. So yeah, I did. And that is critical. Absolutely.
And that's kind of one of the things that I guess it's kind of, I've noticed that it's kind of becoming a trend on this podcast. And I think it's actually should be a focal point of everyone in our industry is how can we as an industry, as individuals, not an industry, but as individuals, be better industry advocates. And I think the experiences that you and Arispe and everyone else up there that actually was, doing these town halls, communicating the actual science behind extracting, fossil fuels or hydrocarbons versus these smear campaigns, whatever you want to call it. I think that's I would love to kind of maybe a different podcast potentially discuss and maybe get a couple of people on and talk about how can we be better industry advocates from actual experience of going to the Mars, going to these communities and actually discuss it. So anyway, that's kind of a tangent that we can get on later on. So anyway, so you're doing this, you're back into drilling and so continue.
Yeah. So like I said, towards the end of my drilling time at EQT, it felt more like IT project management, if anything, which again was a valuable experience. It set me up as I moved on to completions role. So completions engineering, moved on to a supervisory role within completions, again, still office-based,
okay.
But still, again, very, very clear when you're in that role, how important maintaining those relationships with the people in the field are, right? I mean, to execute safely, to execute efficiently. Moved on from completions to a reserves role. So took over as manager of reserves engineering, which, the reserves part is probably the least sexy of it, but the secondary piece of managing reserves is the investor relations work that you do. Some of the M&A analysis that came with that role at the time, and a lot of forecasting, a lot of coordinating with our midstream counterparts. So at the time, EQT had both a midstream company and the production company. So I was certainly on the production side. And, all that collaboration just speaks to, building trust, sharing information, aligning yourselves on strategy, which again, you just see these patterns over and over again, all while fortunately, at least in my position, being able to learn different sides of the business and really seeing how it impacts the bottom line output, if you will, both the literal numbers and even just the more flowery figurative language that might be used for investor relations purposes.
Did you see a lot of your colleagues, I guess, at the time? Because it seems like your focus. I mean, it seems like each, position or role or whatever you want to call in your career, you're identifying a couple key trends that are themes that I'm hearing. It's communication, it's trust, and you're not saying it, but transparency. I'm seeing between teams and different roles and responsibilities. Is that just something that I guess how did you put that in your toolbox, or how did you understand, I guess, the importance of that? The communication and the relationship side of your role.
Well, I think for one, I was on the lookout for it because early in your career, you hear words like, oh, communication, trust, you hear it. And again, it becomes so cliched, right? I mean, it was almost, every meeting, every safety meeting, it's the importance of communication. And, again, you don't want to roll your eyes because it's true, but again, you risk losing meaning. So I think as I was going through, it's in your mind and you're saying, wait a sec, this isn't cliche, so how do you harness that and make sure that, especially when you move into a leadership position, you really empower people to build strong connections, strong relationships that are not surface level. Because that, for the teams that I led, for the teams that I work with, for the people I worked for, I mean, it comes down to relationships, which again, I mean, I almost, relationships again, it's just like, oh, that's very deep. But the thing is, it is, and it's easy to screw up. And, part of what I do now is helping people avoid unconsciously screwing things up because
that's
very easy to do.
But that's the thing. I mean, that's an excellent point. There's so many things out there. I mean, not just currently in today's market, but I mean, previously, such as you said, communication, teamwork. There's so many cliche. What is a couple right now? The new normal. Be innovative. Like, you're right. It gets very cliche after you hear it over and over. But I think that's important. What you're doing, what you're saying is, yes, it might be cliche, but there is a lot. It's cliche for a reason. There's a lot of value into that. And so I kind of want to start getting into that aspect of the conversation right now on around 2019, your, I guess, career went to a kind of a fork in the road, correct? And you actually pivoted and used all the communication skills. And talk to me about that. Talk to me about pivoting from the oil and gas industry kind of into being a coach or a leadership coach for the oil and gas industry, if you don't mind.
Sure. So, I guess you could say 2 years before the pivot, maybe 2.5 years, EQT went through, or I should say began, 2 years of pretty intense changes.
Okay.
So this is 2017. I was leading at the time. It was a group that had responsibilities for a lot of the operational planning. We had some functional roles that were somewhat land related. So permitting, coal coordination. Again, we did a lot of the forecasting. So, we were in this role where, again, we're really touching a lot of different elements of the company. And then along comes the acquisition of Rice Energy. So this was a $6.7 billion acquisition that, as you can imagine, upends your I shouldn't say upend, but I mean, it upends your strategy, your everything that you're doing. I think, the party line is that it complements it. It enhances it. It definitely was a synergistic, to throw out another buzzword, synergistic move. But the reality is you're introducing new people, you're introducing new connections, you're introducing, a company that was, roughly 10 years old versus the company that EQT was, which was 130 years old.
So you're combining two very different cultures.
Exactly. So you're doing all these things, which again, on paper, operationally, you make things work. You absorb them, you learn, you take the best of breed and all these other things. You could do the same thing from a talent standpoint, but the reality is, you still had two different cultures. And, fortunately at that time, EQT had invested in me by getting a traditional executive coach. So, going through all of these massive changes at EQT, going through even some changes in, personal life and everything, this coach really kind of pulled all that together and, really helped me control, what I was in charge of. So the 50-person team that I was leading at the time, having that coach sort of in my back pocket, if you will, to bounce ideas off of and have him challenge me was crucial. And, set me and quite frankly, set my team up for success over the following 2 years as we navigated, again, the integration of Rice Energy. And then about a year later, the overtaking of the former Rice Energy folks of EQT in what was, again, some would say is probably one of the more interesting oil and gas stories, at least before all the craziness of the pandemic. So, I had this coaching framework. I knew it worked. I'd seen it in practice. There was another coach there, sort of internal coach. It was just one of the many hats she wore, but, she was there heading closer to 2019 that I was able to kind of extract. All right, well, what do you do? How do you do it? So I really began to see the value of this even before, again, it became clear that my job was going to be coming to an end. So again, took a couple steps backwards there, but, I'd had exposure to coaching in a way that, if you told me what an executive coach was years prior to that, I would have said, well, I don't know what you're talking about.
No, what is an executive coach? How about that?
Sure. So an executive coach, at least in my definition, is a person who is able to extract the, say, optimal performance from someone else. And typically they're doing it in a business setting.
Well,
because
how is that done? How is that done? How do you extract the optimal performance from someone, or how do you dial in? So tell me about your role right now, because I'm very interested in this because a lot of reasons, the leadership, the communication. I'm very interested in this. So tell me about kind of your role. How do you extract this? I guess the value, the efficiencies of people.
Sure. So assuming you have some foundation of trust, which obviously just like, a coach in a sporting, situation, you're, if you don't have the trust of your players, you're not going to get top performance. So, I mean, that's the first thing. If you have some level of trust from the person you're working with, that is undoubtedly a prerequisite.
Okay.
I'd say actually, I mean, that's one of the, say, 3 prerequisites that I have in working with folks is, you have to have some trust that this might work. Maybe not that it will work, but that it might work. So going from there, the way to actually extract it is first and foremost asking questions. So, I mean, JP, just like you do on this podcast and we're doing here, asking questions to understand what that person is trying to accomplish.
Okay.
And, again, that sounds pretty rudimentary, but it's funny when you start digging into it, typically what the person is trying to accomplish is not, say there's somebody in a C-suite, obviously they can rattle off metrics and they can rattle off stock prices and they can rattle off, growth targets and they can rattle off survival, if you will, in this day and age. But the reality, there's usually something deeper. And once you get into that, then you start discovering what it is that's actually holding them back. And again, typically it's not the things that, their existing resources are really helping them through. So it's this peeling back of the onion, it's asking questions and it's uncovering, all right, what do you really want to accomplish? And what's missing? What's holding you back? And then going from there and coming up with a plan on how to do it. But the fun thing is for me, and again, I didn't have an appreciation for maybe the nuts and bolts of how this gets done until I started doing it. The fun thing is, you're not serving necessarily as an advisor. And this comes across a lot in, if I'm coaching people from a career standpoint and, they're looking for something new, I'm not there telling you what to do. I work with a lot of smart people and they know the answers most of the time, or they have an idea of where to find them. And I'm just poking and prodding and helping them figure out what that plan is, what path they're going to go down, and then holding them accountable. So again, I mean, I just rattled off sort of a long-winded answer, but it's pretty simple. It's, discovering what they need to do, clarifying what they need to do, unpacking things to come up with some strategy that for the most part is their strategy, and then holding them accountable and doing that in a very sort of fluid way that adapts to, especially in the oil and gas industry, the fact that things are constantly changing.
Well, how does an executive coach measure, I guess, their because I'm not familiar. I've seen executive coach. I've seen, career, guys, I'm not familiar with it. How does an executive coach measure their, I guess, success or results?
So an executive coach measuring results is typically from the stakeholders of the person coaching. So, in a business environment, that's typically fairly easy. You hear about 360-degree feedbacks and, there's all different versions of it. I have one that's kind of rooted in, the how well is that person helping themselves grow, protect, and sustain their success. And then on the flip side, how well is the person I'm coaching, growing, sustaining, and protecting the success of their stakeholders. And, those are really 6 kind of, cut and dry things. And you say, hey, look, if this is where things stood when we started, and this is things where, where things are now, then you could see if improvement has been made. And, again, whether it's attributable to coaching or not, quite frankly, it doesn't matter because, the individual tends to know whether those, sometimes unquantifiable things are worth it, if you will, which is, again, speaking as an engineer, speaking in an industry where, things are as black and white as possible. I spend a lot of time with people trying to quantify the unquantifiable. And that can be one of the trickiest things when you're looking at, the ROI, if you will, of an investment like this. But, it's also, as a lot of people would say, it's one of those things, you kind of know it when you see it, or you know it when you feel it, if you will.
So executive coach, so who would be, if is it just strictly executives? Or, is this, or would you advise having a coach for kind of, if people are, where would you advise people getting a coach?
So I'm cautious to go out and just advise people to go get a coach because I'd say probably the coaching industry is expanding faster than about, just about anything else you can imagine. So there's no shortage of people out there that are willing to help coach you on anything from, your love life, your marriage, to obviously your tennis or golf game, or certainly from a business standpoint. So, I'm hesitant to just say, well, go out and get a coach. But the reality is, JP, yeah, everyone can benefit to some degree from coaching. And,
that's like people saying they only go to relationship counselors once it's doom and gloom in their marriage or relationship. When in reality, it benefits even when things are going good.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing too. You say, and I guess I kind of maybe ignored your question a little bit. You said, well, what is an executive coach?
A lot of people ignore my question.
Well, as a coach, that's probably the biggest red flag if you have somebody that doesn't want to listen. But no, going back to your question, what is an executive coach? Well, all of those different things I just mentioned in many ways can be wrapped up in executive coaching, because as I describe it, it's more of an executive mindset. And what does that mean? Well, it means that, you have responsibility for much more than just, you and your business. You have responsibility for stakeholders, second, third, fourth degree stakeholders. Going back to your earlier comment about, the community, and, you have some say in how your organization interacts with the community if you happen to be in, a leader within oil and gas. So it's this executive mindset that, if you're a stay-at-home mom or dad, it's the same thing, right? You're running a household. You have all these different stakeholders. You almost have a finance department. You have perhaps a childcare department. You have a landscaping department. You have all these different things. And, what does that make you? It's an executive in many ways. And just like you said, having somebody before you need it to figure out where your pain points are, to not have to wait, to not just simply tell you to, well, sign up for this class, and if you go through this or you read this book, you're going to figure this out. No, like, you want to be able to pick up the phone and have a 15-minute conversation with somebody that's going to ask the right questions, that's going to, poke and prod you, that's going to get you to figure out what exactly you need to do and then hold you accountable. And, that's what a coach is. A coach isn't just directing traffic necessarily. A coach is sitting right there alongside you and helping you, maybe weave in and out of traffic, or help you figure out what's on the horizon. And, again, so, I don't want to downplay the distinction between a traditional executive coach and, again, a relationship coach, or a life coach, or a golf coach. But the reality is there's a lot of overlap there. And, a lot of the hats that I wear, even under the guise of either career coaching or executive coaching, they overlap with relationship coaching and parenting coaching, and, and all these things that I'm not an expert in. But again, I'm able to help extract the insights that people have within themselves to, make a difference, to perform better, and to, again, avoid screwing things up and taking 10 steps backwards when it's completely avoidable.
Well, it's just, it is a relationship. I can kind of see the similarities between that and relationship coach, because you need communication, you need trust, you need a goal. So I do appreciate that. It sounds like it's tailored. It sounds like it's really somebody to ping off a soundboard. What are you seeing? What trends are you seeing? I guess, let's talk about since March until today. We're doing this in January 11th. What trends are you seeing right now with, I guess, some of your clients, or some questions you're getting, or some common themes that you're getting? And what are you telling these people?
Sure. So, probably the most common question is, are things as bad out there as they seem?
That's a good,
and again, from a metric standpoint, we all hear these anecdotes, speaking with either directly with hiring managers or people that have some insights at companies, hundreds of applications for a single position.
Yep.
And so, that's the first question is, are things really that bad? And again, usually the first question is, well, what do you mean? If your only measure is, are there, what's the ratio of jobs to, job seekers? Yeah, it's bad, but what are you after? Right. Because, my guess is that, for these career seekers, if you're a reservoir engineer, that's probably not your only goal in life, is to get the next reservoir engineering position.
Okay.
And, that starts the conversation, right? Sometimes that's enough for them to say, okay, well, what else, tell me more.
The aha moment where people start thinking outside the box, outside their predicted career trajectory.
That's it. And again, we can come back to my own path. And it was, it wasn't just a matter of trying to find something that replicated what I had been doing, in my prior life. And fortunately, again, I had resources to talk to about that, to figure out that, yeah, that would have been short-sighted. That might've been where I wound up. I mean, I might've put all my eggs back in, doing something similar. My last role there was leading a data governance and analytics group. I loved it. There was a time, leading that group, I thought, this is it. This is the trajectory. The sexiest new C-suite title was, chief data officer. I could see myself there in, 10 years. And it was just like, this is it. And then, in a matter of what was probably, a couple of weeks, I was like, actually, no, that sounded cool, but there's more to it than that. And, helping people get to that point is, selfishly, I love it. It's great. I enjoy it. Because, I could see sometimes the visceral reaction when people start to set aside some of the logical, but potentially short-sighted metrics, in terms of, again, are things going to be okay?
Yeah. So the trends are you seeing people that are coming to you potentially about a new role in oil and gas? You see people coming to you about potentially pivoting out of oil and gas, and if so, I mean, can you talk to me about people that I guess that you're interacting with that are entertaining the idea or pursuing to transition out of the oil and gas industry?
Sure. So I think, right there, that is probably the most common situation of, sort of both of what you just said. It's people first and foremost trying to decide, do I pivot out of oil and gas or do I stay? Which, again, typically the first step is saying, well, that's an awfully binary choice to be making, and it might not be necessary. So that's common. And, then typically it's, again, coming back to, all right, well, what is the ultimate goal? And I don't even want to say goal sometimes, because goals can give sort of an intermediate sense. What's bigger than that? What are your core values? What are your, what's driving you? What are your passions? What's important? And again, some of those things sound kind of, woo-woo for especially a lot of people in oil and gas, which is why, one, I think it helps that I focus exclusively on people in the energy industry. So at least if I'm spouting some woo-woo things as, an oil and gas engineer, they, might not be so dismissive of it.
At least they're woo-woo, and then you can speak to them.
Well, that's it. And you can do it in sort of a lighthearted way. But at the end of the day, you also, maybe kind of got to grab them a little bit and say, all right, we're going to get there. We're going to, the answer to whether you need to pivot or whether you should put all your eggs in trying to stay in oil and gas, we'll get there. But, that's a couple steps down the road. And, you got to build a stronger foundation to, build off of that, because guess what? You might find a great job in oil and gas. And as we all know, it could be gone in 6 or 12 months. And, you do this homework up front, and it doesn't have to be onerous. And again, this is where, sometimes the distinction between the one-on-one coaching versus just sending somebody through a program and checking the box, or even worst case, just, having somebody scroll through on their own, through LinkedIn, 4 hours a day and looking at either jobs or these, positive sounding comments and affirmations and all these other things. You can cut through all that crap and accelerate the process and get some clarity, and then start moving and taking some, some actionable steps to move forward.
So what, I guess I was going to ask a question on, if someone, what would be the top, main points of if you would advise someone to transition out versus if you advise people to stay in the oil and gas? But it sounds to me that's very catered and it's very specific to everyone's individual, not just goals, but as you said, your drive, your passion. What do you want to get up and do every day? So I guess it's an individual, metric on what you advise someone.
Absolutely. And again, there's some structure, some foundation, some frameworks that, I have that are specific to oil and gas, that, they lean on, sort of the oil and gas life cycle, in fact, just to put things in context, and in a framework that people are used to. So, there is this, exploration phase that happens at the, that even in unconventional energy, right? I mean, you need to explore and figure out, you're going to put a wind farm, in XYZ location. So, you do that exploration phase, you step through, you figure out a strategy on how to develop it. And then again, you start being able to produce results, and you have a way to measure those results and make sure you're still on track. And then once you have that, you got to transmit it, right? You got to get it into the hands of your stakeholders and the people that matter. And to the extent you're, in a career transition, that is communicating, obviously, either resume or cover letters, but, more importantly, conversations back and forth. And, you get what you've produced. You get the things you've developed in your career, and you get them into the hands of the people that need it, so that, it gets delivered to your stakeholders, to your end users. And, that cycle can be repeated over and over again, but it's nice to step through that and, do it with an individual so that, they can go back and they can do that same process again without necessarily having to, pick up the phone and give somebody a call. So, again, that's part of the distinction of coaching, is this sort of, as you said, right? It's this one-on-one catered, I don't want to say buddy, but, partner, this conscious, committed partner that has your best interests in mind. And
career guidance. Has your conversation changed from as a coach from a year ago to today? How have they changed, and how?
Absolutely. So when I first set out, again, this was the end of 2019, I thought I would be spending a lot more of my time on, corporate sponsored engagements. And, that's still certainly the more conventional executive coaching route. But, you get into obviously early 2020 and things happen.
Yeah.
Those conversations, one, they started shifting to more career-oriented conversations. But two, I found myself spending a lot more time trying to get people to stop thinking in terms of, absolutes and blacks and whites, if you will.
That's tough these days.
Exactly. And, but, getting into this sort of probabilistic mindset, if you will, has been huge. And I've spent a lot of time, especially from, I'd say, the middle of 2020 on, really getting people to stop and think, look, you don't know what's going to happen. Going back to the question, do I stay in the oil and gas industry or not? You can make a decision. You can make the most informed decision possible, and it could still turn out to be catastrophic and on paper the wrong one. So getting that out of your head and saying, look, it's a statistical play, if you will. What's most likely to get you to, some level of fulfillment and purpose and checking the boxes on all those core values. Let's think in those terms, not these black and white, should I do X or Y? Should I apply for this job or that job? Should I put this as the header on my resume or this? And it's just like, well, again, what do you think is more likely to move forward, to have an impact and get you what you want? You make that decision and you move on. That, you're going to make wrong decisions, but the more decisions you make, if you're halfway intelligent and you're leaning on the right resources, you're going to come out okay in the end. But, you get into 2020 and you get concerned. And again, it makes sense, right? Yeah. It's a logical thing, especially, working with a lot of technical people to think in terms of strictly black and white. But that's one of the things that could really hold people back. And, that's one of the things, probably the word I hear the most right now is stuck. When people come and say, Joe, I'm stuck.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, why are you stuck? And again, a lot of times it's because there are these binary decisions they think they have to make and they have to get right. And very often that's not the case.
So that, I would say that'd be a huge benefit to utilize someone like yourself to just kind of get that outside perspective, that, that neutral perspective, that versus, because we're so bogged down in a this or that, black, white, 1, 0, as you said, the binary decision making. I think that's great to get that, I guess, that third party kind of at distance, but, still in your same team coach, as coach, perfect title, to kind of look at things differently, look at things from the 30,000 foot view versus, everything on LinkedIn, this muddy, murky path everyone's trying to walk through. I think that's great to have a coach to kind of elevate you on the new perception, which I think would be refreshing for a lot of people to have. And as an executive coach, you don't have to be an executive to utilize a coach, do you?
No. Like I said earlier, it's this executive mindset that carries over regardless of where you are, in your organization, or, if you work with people that start their own companies, right? And, they can give themselves whatever title they want, but but again, at the end of the day, they are an executive. They have to have that mindset. And it's not much different. In fact, I would argue it's not any different, whether I'm talking again with somebody at the highest rung of a company or, a junior engineer or somebody that's still in school. Everybody's trying to figure out how to get from A to B in the best way possible. And, like I said, the coaching itself, it's not a big mystery. It's not complicated. That's the big secret, right? You don't have to be an expert in a particular field in order to be a good coach and an effective coach in that field. However, at least, one of the things that I think I bring to the table is the fact that I can at least ask better questions and typically can do it in a more efficient way to move things along because of that understanding. But again, for the most part, ask your friends, ask your family, make them ask the dumb questions, because it's the dumb questions that, very often, again, can knock people off their pedestal and say, oh man, what was I thinking? That wasn't, I'm totally off base here. So, leverage those resources that you have.
Questions, don't be defensive, and get ready for honest feedback, pretty much. You did an interesting post on LinkedIn. You talked about the GPS. This is the GPS mindset. It's growth. What was it? Is it growth, protect, and sustain? Right?
Yep.
So, and you said that, again, we're talking about these cliche things. Can you talk about the GPS mindset, I guess, right now in 2021, and how, I guess, what your thoughts, I guess, the application of it?
Sure. So I think in general, the idea with this GPS mindset, using certainly a driving analogy or MWD analogy, if you're steering a well, is that, we've all gotten to some level of success in our lives with some, resources, with some, things we were born with, external resources, people we've leaned on, things tools we've brought in to use. And, again, it could be rather cliche to say, as one sort of a famous executive coach, Marshall Goldsmith, says, and as one of his top selling books was, what got you here won't get you there. So again, that's a concept I think we all understand. But the problem is when you're actually behind the wheel and you're driving along, it's easy to forget that. You've plugged something into your GPS. This is what I'm going to be. I'm going to retire at 62, and I'm going to be, again, whatever. I'm going to be a senior geologist, and I'm going to do all the. You have all these things. You plug it in, and you're just driving along.
Or it's like, I'm successful because I've done X, Y, Z in the past, and that's what I'm going to do in the future.
Exactly. Yeah. So all those things can contribute to driving blindly, if you will, or again, drilling a well blindly, which can be catastrophic. And so, you want a GPS that isn't just there on your dashboard with some destination that you plugged in that, may or may not help you reroute as needed, but you want something or someone that's there to help you continue growing, continue protecting what's worth protecting, because the reality is not everything's worth protecting. So like you said, JP, I did this in my former life. I succeeded this. Well, guess what? Protecting those titles and protecting some elements of your legacy might not be worth it. But you see a lot of people who, again, whether they're in an executive position within a company or they're going through a career transition, they're trying to protect things that aren't worth protecting. So you want to figure out what's worth protecting and then figure out the best way to do it. And then ultimately the S there in the GPS is sustain. So, it's one thing to, succeed on some of your short-term goals. It's one thing to, to move forward, to have success, to figure out what you want to hold on to. But the reality is that, again, as 2020 showed us, that's not always sustainable. In fact, in many cases, we're doing things that are unsustainable. So there's a health and wellness component to that, obviously. But, coming back to just companies that are trying to stay solvent, right? They're doing things that could make sense, but it's not sustainable. Just, again, you go back to oil field cliches, growth for growth's sake is and will continue to be unsustainable. And, that's the same thing that could happen in our own lives, right? Which is why, I talk about peak performance because it's nice and alliterative, but the reality is it's, sustainable performance. It's optimal performance, because peak performance, just like with a well, right? I mean, you can pull on it as hard as possible and, get a heck of an IP on a well and then, damage the thing and it never gets, never reaches its full potential. It's the same thing. But if you're listening to people, advisors, formally or informally, or you're relying, like you said, on, your prior experiences, that GPS sitting on your dashboard is very likely not going to steer you to, what your ultimate destination is, or certainly what it should be.
Right, where you want to be. Joe, that's just a great message. And do you have anything that I'm not bringing up, a message that you like to communicate to the listeners out there?
No, I think that stepping back and trying not to look at things from a binary standpoint, again, is one of the things I'd love to emphasize, because, I see it in our personal lives, right? I mean, you're making small decisions each and every day. And, one analogy I use a lot, right? It's well, what do I want to have for dinner? Or, if you can find a restaurant that's open and you go out to eat and you look at the menu and you say, oh, I want the I don't know, baked ziti instead of the chicken parm, and baked ziti comes out and it's horrible. Well, you don't kick yourself for making a bad decision. You worked with the information you had. And I cannot emphasize enough how often people are beating themselves up because they feel like they made a wrong decision, even though, it was as well informed as it could have been. So that's, again, it's something we already talked about it. So I don't want to beat a dead horse, but that is by and large the thing that, people struggle with and really leaves them kind of stuck in a rut or again, stuck on the side of the road with, maybe a fully functional GPS, but it doesn't do them any good if they're in a ditch there and they need to be hauled out of there.
Joe, I think that's such a great point. I mean, I think if that, and I'm thinking about this, I mean, you're talking, I'm thinking about that whole binary mindset, it's like, oh, if I don't do this, then this, if I don't do this, that leads to so much anxiety. That leads to so much stress, unnecessary stress, because you're right. It's either a sink or swim or win, defeat. It's such a dangerous mindset to get into because that just bleeds out to every relationship, every decision in your life. So I like that. I like that message of don't think everything is binary. There's more to it. There's areas of gray that is just fine too. And that's probably, and it might not be a bad idea to venture down those areas of gray too.
Yeah, sure. And again, it helps if you're, sitting in Pittsburgh or somewhere in Texas on a nice gray day. And, like we said earlier, right. You can turn some of that potential doom and gloom into something that's better. And that's where too, as an offshoot to that, I'd say JP is, if you're in a position where you need to make these decisions or you're under stress or you're leading a team, or again, you're in career transition, this mindset is key. But, for people that are constantly looking how to help other people, that's the one thing I also advise is look for signs of that in other people, so, people are always wondering, well, how can I help? What can I do?
Right.
Be on guard for people that say, oh, you can help me do X, Y, Z. And, maybe X, Y, Z isn't what's going to help that person. Just try to get them to, open up a little bit about where they need to go. You don't need to be a professional coach to ask good questions and help people uncover where, again, they're focusing on the wrong decisions and focusing their energy in the wrong place sometimes.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, Joe. Let's get anything else to add or anything like that. I think we can kind of wrap it up now. I appreciate you coming on. I think your message is a great message right now because you're right. There's a lot of doom and gloom. There's a lot of binary decisions. There's a lot of this or that. And a lot of times people don't want to ask questions right now because they feel like they might be sticking their head up out of the sand. And now it's not the time to do that. But again, these are great questions and just great, I guess, mental state to be in or these reflective questions to ask, what does drive you? Where do you want to be? I mean, so I appreciate you coming on and everyone listening. This is Joe Sinnott, I got your name right. Sinnott?
Close enough. Sinnott. I've been called, as you can imagine, I've living in Southern Louisiana for a couple of years. Joe Sinnot was not.
I was going to say an old
Sinnott, Sinnot, whatever you want to go with there, Jay.
I apologize. Anyway, so this is Joe Sinnott from I probably messed that up again. The executive coach, an executive coach in the oil and gas industry, and the founder of Witting Partners. And Joe, I appreciate you coming on. And again, if everyone needs to reach out to him, you can find him on LinkedIn. Shoot him a message, drop him a note. Even if you just want to pick his brain on something or just introduce yourself. Highly advise it. And I appreciate it. And Joe, we'll see you around, buddy.
All right, JP. Thank you very much. Take care.
Take care.